Okay. Well, right. So last time we wrapped up Megachilidae, we had kind of an open office hour situation, and the votes were either to go into Andrina, which we are not ready to do, or to stay within Megachilidae, and that's what we're doing. So I'm gonna jump in with Stelis. We chose to jump in with stuff that my guard user didn't have keys for, since he will, be joining us when he can, and we like to go through his keys. And no class next week because Sam is going to be somewhere doing something.
Mississippi, meetings, collecting. Of course.
Of course, collecting. Sam, how many bees in each of those transects from your
Oh, the
desert?
Arizona?
Yeah, the Arizona visit.
Oh my gosh. We probably are going to go over 10,000 total, but I don't know what the per transect. Sometimes it's hundreds. So, yeah, and all without any bloom. Essentially, no bloom in the deserts, but there are bees going in the traps.
Pretty
Pretty
wild.
amazing.
Yeah.
Are we ready?
Yeah, we're ready. You just
Okay.
go do
All
your
right.
thing.
Stelis, a parasitic bee group. I'm going to share my screen here. Of Megachilidae, and has been split and lumped several different times internally. Now we're in a lumping phase, and I'll show you if I can get to my screen here. So are we seeing my screen now?
Yes, we are.
Okay, this is I'll show you a little bit higher res, but basically this is from our Bees of Maryland little online publication, and you're looking at Stelis, and there's two. The way to think about it is there's two color groups. One is almost always dark with cream or white markings, and the other looks a lot like the Anthidium, Anthidiellum groups, and they are dark with varying. Often in Florida, you can get some different colorations, which sometimes have also been named species that are a yellow to orangish yellow markings on that black. So right now they're all lumped together, and I think we'll jump to the microscope now and take a look at the defining, let's see, does it go F? There we go. The defining characteristic for Stelis, which is pretty obscure and worthy of a look because sometimes it's hard to see. And then we'll talk about the gestalt, which is the kinds of things you should look at a Stelis and go like, oh, that's probably a Stelis. And these are very uncommon bees, so nobody gets long strings of them. Stelis lateralis, which we'll see, is probably the most commonly occurring one in the East. It's an Osmia parasite and small, about the same size as Osmia. And then you have a variety of others that that are parasitizing both Osmia, but also some megachilid groups. So right now, this is the defining character. So if we're looking here on the tarsal end, this is the tarsus of a Stelis louisae, I believe. And what we're seeing here is the tibial spur there, which we're ignoring, and we're looking instead, and this is why it gets confusing, like, oh, you see that, is that what they're talking about? But no, you're looking at the end of the tibia itself, where it would join if they were there, the tarsal segments, beta tarsi going off in that direction. And what we're looking at here are two somewhere between a spine and a lump. And they're pointy, they're not very big. One is longer than the other. And in the other similar groups, i.e. other megachilidae, you're only going to see one stub slash spine on that segment. So that's what you look for. And sometimes it's really hard to see, particularly if you have a small one, the legs are curled up, or you're not quite sure what to look for. But this is the basic configuration of all those.
Sam, which leg
And
is that?
it's the middle leg. So the tibia of the middle leg, the end, the apical end, and ignoring the tibial spur, but looking at the shape and the projections, too small, spur-like, let's call it spine-like, possibly, but they're relatively low profile and oblique. So the vibe often though, so this is Stelis louisae, and it would be instantly sort of thought to be in that Anthidiellum type of group, and it looks an awful lot like them. And maybe there's reasons for that. A couple of things within louisae, which is the one that the yellow one that us northerners see, you have, just to talk about identification, straight species ID, is you have T1, 3, and 4 with lateral markings, not really stripes per se, but they're complete. And in the other possible things like Anthidium, Anthidiellum, Paranthidium, these lines are not complete. There are yellow markings, but they're broken, as we might call them, in the middle. And this is always a sort of fuzzy line area with maybe markings, maybe not, but not well developed in that group. What sort of, in a vibey way, characterizes the females in particular is that the back end of the abdomen is relatively flattened, and wide. So instead of coming to a nice point or really being um, uh, rounded out or thick, and I'm going to show the side now, it's relatively flat, what we dorsal ventrally flattened, so it's squished down as if you took a Anthidium hind end and just squeezed it with your fingers. And so this, maybe not dramatically, is an awful lot flatter and a little bit longer than the rounded ends of other species, possibly to help with a nest insertion of its eggs and things like that. While we're looking here, the shape of the rear end on the females, and sometimes there's actually spines and things back here on some rare ones, Stelis nitida, for example, not louisae, and federalis, can be quite different. It's one of the character states. It's one of the characters, and then there's different states of what the end of the segment looks like. Additionally, now that we have the specimen on deck, and we can talk about another character to look at in both the black and the yellow groups, it doesn't really matter, is the presence of upright dark hairs. You can see these hairs, I think, pretty well here versus no hairs, or in a few cases, I guess. Usually dark hairs are almost always projecting up. They're almost never prone like white hairs are. So it's probably more the case. I just don't see that many to have this all memorized. More the case that these dark hairs are present and upright on the back end of that specimen. There's additional characters, and we might look at different specimen to look at on the head, in the head area right at the vertex. Well, might as well zoom in because it's convenient. And what we'd be looking for here is the presence of dark hairs at the vertex. So the vertex being, in general, this area between the lateral ocelli and the rear of the head. Here, I would say entirely white, but a lot of times in Stelis, you have to look really closely because as in several other species groups, a dark hair is dark on its branches or partially translucent, so it's difficult because of the way light is being transmitted through it to see that it is actually a dark and not a light hair. if we move down, I'm seeing something that might be possibly dark hairs further down to illuminate that point. Do I really see that? So for example, and I'm not sure if we look, so this would be below and more towards the face, there does appear to be some dark hairs just there, which I don't know is an identification point for this group, but it could be. So within Stelis, there has been a bunch of taxonomic back and forth, and no one has really revised these or tackled these in a long time. Frank Parker started, but Terry Griswold's shop started in on this, but never really finished anything other than a possible unpublished manuscript that I saw once. But as you can imagine, the dark specimens and these light colored specimens have been put into different groups. Additionally, this is Stelis louisae. This is, if I have my information right, this is a nest parasite of the resin using megachile like Exilus and Campanuli, which is sometimes split off from megachilidae. So an interesting taxonomic association there. This and one other species whose name I can't remember are the only ones who have this shape to the propodium. So if we look here at the propodium, so here's orientation going on, and we'll flip this the other direction. So here's the scutellum. It's projecting a little bit, but nothing like Anthidiellum rather. But you know, a little bit confusing again with Anthidiellum having a very thin shelf-like plate projecting out even further. But this does project a little bit. That's the problem with taxonomy sometimes, is like we know it when we see it, but telling you how to know it when you see it can be tricky. Working with known specimens, way to go. So here's the scutellum, and here's the propodium, and here in other species, almost all the others except for this and one other species, the propodium is dropping off like a cliff straight down. And here we have a little shelf, not exactly at right angles to the surface here, but quite noticeably angled out. And it's filled, we'll see a better picture of this, it's filled with squares that are defined by raised line carina, if you want. So there's cells that run all along that area. And that separates out louisae, and again, this other species I can't recall, but we'll see it soon enough, from the other Stelis, and also puts it in its own subgenus, which sometimes Dolica Stelis, sometimes it's listed. I think it may be even listed in the Discover Life genera section or genus section. I'll have to check on that. So if we look now straight down, we're seeing this shelf filled with these pits, big blocky pits there. And when we are going to look at the other species, you don't really see this projecting out. This would be a vertical section of that bee's body. And if you saw pits, they would be only at the far lateral sides. So we'll show that next. So I mentioned before, but these are nest parasites. So the females don't have scopa under the abdomen. This is a female, and there are hairs there though. So it's not that it's bare. It's just nowhere near, I'll show it, nowhere near the density of hairs that you would expect, say, from an Anthidiellum type of species, because they're not carrying pollen. All right, we're going down here. So female, here's this flattened T6, and here are hairs right down here, but they're nowhere near the density of any of the other megachilids that are pollen carrying. Again, when you're starting out, you could have that question, is that a hair or is that not? And that's why the tibial characters are useful, and always getting your specimens double checked by someone else is so useful. It's so easy to go down a rabbit hole. Okay, so let's go to the guides now. And let me find that here. So we, well, if we, there's a couple things here. One, do I have the bee genera guide? So in the bee genera guide, there's illustrations of the Stelis foot, which seems to have scrolled off of this page somehow. Go to the top. So we're a lot of times when you have questions, now that you're sophisticated, you would simply go to the has button. So we're in that category now, and you get to see all the various categories, and we can do a simple find for Stelis because you know that you want to double check. There's your Dolichostelis versus Stelis. We want to double check our IDs. Hoplostelis, which I believe is a probably Mexican or South American, well, or Caribbean, would presume parasite that's not Stelis, but like Stelis. And here is our Stelis versus selected other genera. And why did it not jump all the way down to where it was supposed to? There we go. And you can see the illustrations of these points here that we just saw online, two dull spine-like things, and then in the other groups, the other Anthidiinae probably, you just have a single spine. Okay, so we are done with the bee genera. Now let's go to the Stelis page. So on the Stelis page, we'll just restart the whole guide here. There are males and females would be separated by presence of a sting, which is often poking out in the on Stelis. Females are much more common, and then because you don't have scopal hairs, you're going to be looking probably more often at the antennal counting as your safe place to determine gender. The males, we'll see one hopefully here in a second, that have the usual 7 exposed tergites, and I guess sternites, but tergites at least. But the 7th tergite usually is tucked way in, I would call it under T6. So often it's a little fuzzy as to whether you're looking at a tergite or a sternite. We'll see a couple examples there. So as we scroll down to some of these characters, we have the obvious ones here where we're looking at the tergite color. So we're seeing with the bright red and yellow marks on there, and that gets us into louisae, and then these australis and grossa, more southern species. So louisae is as a group is what most of us are going to run into species wise. In the South, louisae in the past, again, with a lot of mix-ups and things too going on in the literature, has been split into Floridana and costalis, I think. So you'll see those names sometimes, but right now they're all placed into that one particular group. Then you have the black and white with some pale markings group, which is the bulk of the things you'll see. So those are these dark ones. And then, oops, I included by accident the red ones too. So there is that group. And then a few are completely black. So already we have some sections that allow us to split things out pretty quickly. These two, I think diversicolor and atter are all, we can look at the map, are also Coarcticus is northern, Stelis and diversicolor are the southern species. So yellow and green down below. And I think atter is maybe a Florida Peninsula specialist. I did want to mention, as I was poking around on the web, that a very, very good guide, one that has really been ginned up by Glenn Hall over the last few years versus Pascarella, who basically just took apart Mitchell's guide for Florida and added in some pictures through his microscope. Glenn has been adding some really high resolution photography here that you can see. Here's a lovely shot of the identification character that we were just seeing before, two spines at the end for one of his Stelis species. But, oops, I lost it. Anyway, they have a pretty complete guide to all the bees in the peninsula of Florida, which are special, often have limited distributions, and is certainly worthy of a look sometimes if you're in the South working on bee identification as yet another means of identifying and trying to identify. I'm just realized, like, oh my gosh, there's so much high quality pictures here that I need to talk to Glenn and see if we can port some of those over to Discover Life. So anyway, there they are.
Can you just copy and paste that into the chat for everybody instead of having to like trying to grab a screenshot?
I'm gonna try just do a bees of Florida. Florida, this should be it. I'm looking for the general link here. Yeah, John Pascarella started it, and Glenn really made it into something even better. All right, I'm putting it into the chat. Is that the plan here? And
well, we also just saw a very effective search string, so I think that the very smart people on this call are going to be able to figure that out.
Well, I'll put this in for the dumb people on this call, as Claire was indicating.
Yes, thank you for including it for me and only me.
Look at you. That was a good riposte there on that attack by myself on people's mentality. Okay, so let's get back to it and not get in trouble in any sort of way. So we will go back to the Stelis guide here, and we restart this. So anyway, these groups may be split out at some point or another, but right now they're all together. Michener thought they should be all stay together, so he holds a lot of gravitas. A lot of these are very straightforward characters, colors, Clypeus color, whether it's black, mix of black and yellow. And then we have the, there's colorations by and next to the compound eyes, there's basically a yellow stripe, as in a lot of other kinds of species that runs up the inner margin of the eye, and you have different options to mark it there. And then color of hair, this is what we were talking about when we were looking at hair color. And if we look at, let's see if mix of light and dark. Yeah, good, thank goodness. Louisae is not on there, so it should be there in the light color.
Can we grab one of those before the class is over to see if we can find those dark hairs?
Yeah, so let's see, I do have specimens there. So I think it was subemarginata, maybe? Yeah. Let me pull my subemarginata out. Let me put louisae to bed and pull the subemarginata. A lot of these are so uncommon. We've only seen one or two in any of our collecting or partners collecting over the years. Pan traps. Without pan traps, I'm not sure where some of this would come from unless people were actually collecting a lot by hand. How are we to determine the status of these rare things? Okay. So theoretically, there we go. So we have, it's not all dark, it's mix, right? So there's not a character that says all dark. Let's just really zoom in here. And so you can see that, and as on the scutum here too, here's the ocelli, back of the head, compound eye. You have both light colored hairs and a scattering of dark colored hairs that if you looked too quickly, you potentially would or could miss. I believe this species, now that it's on deck, well, let's look at a couple things here. This is one of the groups that has the light colored markings on basically a dark black bee, probably Osmia. Well, actually, this is a bigger one. You can't tell. So this could be Hoplitis, maybe. I'm not sure that we know enough about these species preferences. Trying to show you the propodial area, not showing it well, but that at least presents, although the wings in the way, a bit of being more vertical without a shelf of pits. But let's see if I can change this to straight up and down. Whether that's, we have other specimens, so we can look at some of that stuff. Yeah, pretty well. So get the arrow out of the way and we'll go up in magnification. What we're going to look for is the lack of a shelf for that, what would be called the, traditionally in other groups, the dorsal section of the propodium. So orientation, scutellum, propodium is this entire section here. And what, I'm going to bump up the light here, one sec. Go here and go to, let's really add in a lot of light for now. Go back, go in. What we're looking at is the same area, which is this. It's not a shelf, it's still present. You still see at the lateral sides these cells that are defined by raised lines. But in the center, it's gone. So there are, the cells disappear as you get to the center. Species, it can be a species specific trait as to how well defined those cells are. So it's worth looking at if you have some question marks as to which species you have, but it's tricky to define. And I think we dropped that character when we were trying to address how to separate out these identifications. I'm going to bring the light back down now. When looking at these dark specimens, a key character in general is the pattern of these light markings. So this is a pretty, for this group, this is a pretty extreme one. Why can't I get this to go on? Oh, I have to click on it. Move it further back. With quite bold stripes on there. And many of the other groups, these are simple spots, and in a couple, they're completely absent. Mostly there is something to look at here. And it's always this cream coloration with sometimes the, let's call it the maculation, the marking fading, I would call it faded, so that it looks sort of like a dull mark that has white highlights. And I'll show lateralis that I think has that, rather than this bright sort of characteristic white. Let's go to, just to show that, because lateralis is the most commonly seen species. And so it's good to get a vibe on it. And it's got a fairly distinct set of patterns of markings on its abdomen. So it has what we were looking at before. The rear face of the propodium is essentially vertical, a few blocky sets of cells on the side of that first section of the propodium. And then when we look at the back here, oh, this is actually quite well marked. So, but you can see, so usually it has, but these can be quite difficult to see sometimes. So these can be quite restricted. This is, I would say, at the extreme end. The males have more stripes across, but for females, this is quite extensive amount of white coloration on there. There's still more the oval or the round than a stripe. And then there's usually these secondary dots elsewhere. And this one down here is very much what sometimes you will see for all the ones. And this one shows it too, where you're beginning to lose. This is dust. That's possibly dust too. That might not be actually a dot. And where you begin to see that the edges are not well defined, things turn tan and can become darker and darker until it almost blends in with the black background. But this general pattern, I'm not sure if what the variation on this is, but this with at least one set of dots to the interior on, I guess that's 1, 2, 3, 4 on T4 is common, but these lateral dots, probably why it was called lateralis, are pretty distinctive. But things like Coarcticus and a couple others have something similar enough that needs to be addressed. So let's pop back here. I'm going to turn that off. So we've looked at this, the dark erect hairs on T6, and here's the subgenera, if you so desired. And so we'll now go to the hidden characters, which are always findable by going to the menu and clicking on Has. Now, every single character in the guide shows up here, and we can scroll through these to see if any others of these are in need of illumination. So dark hairs, yes. Tour guide collars, yes, we've covered that. Female abdomen S6 shape. So this is, for some species, this makes it super easy to narrow it down because they have things like spines. So here if we look at somewhat concave in center with a distinct central spine, I have to click Has, is only 2 species. And when you see one of these, they're just, which sadly I don't have any females of these 2 species. It's really dramatically present there. And so there's several other versions of this. And we can take a look at to distinct point in the center, atter, and diversicolor. I don't know that I have those in, I might actually. I've got some specimens from the Smithsonian here. And this is diversicolor. Is it a male or a female? And it is a male. So, and I don't have atter. That's that species from Florida. Let's see if we can find no central spine, somewhat concave. So you're looking at let's see, evenly rounded situation. So let's take our lateralis, which is under the scope, and take a look at that. The S6 area. Don't know that we need to spend too much time on this because it's going to look like what probably most of these groups look like. Let's take down the power. So here we have the female. You'll notice that there are hairs, but not a whole lot. And when we look at this area, we see that there's not much of anything going on down here. It would look like almost any other kind of bee. Let's see if we can find something that's a little bit different. So that's evenly rounded across on S6 and no central spine, somewhat concave in center, no central spine. Perhaps, oh, permaculata, I don't have that one either. Okay, so can be a great character if you have a central spine. Otherwise, and possibly there's a pointed ones, but relatively few species are split out. Then we get into these differences between species, which I'm not going to go into at the moment because these are just such rare things that I think those, and I don't have specimens for all of them because of that, that those would have to be learned as you have the specimens come along. Clipeus color, we talked about head color of the hair. We talked about that too. And the yellow, now the males, we haven't talked about very much. Pull this specimen and bring in a Stelis louisae again, but this time a male. I believe it was at one point called Coarticus in this case. No, it was called, sorry, not Coarticus. That's a legit species, costalis. And this one, oh, here it is. And we look at the males, which have really different types of shapes to T7, which is a little bit difficult to see. That's why I want to show this here. I only have a few males. There we go. Because of the way the abdomen's shaped, we'll go back. So what we're looking at here is, let's see, has, hopefully I turned off the hases up there. I did. Has a this first character is the louisae and australis again one, which has, as usual, a number of really fantastically great characters that should have been spread around to the other Stelis species, but was not. So, but we'll start with this one because it's quite distinct. Okay, so I think a little bit of the trick here is that if we're counting back, I think that's one, we're doing the tergites, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. From the top, you only see these 6. So that's why in general, it makes sense to do antennal counts on Stelis because, or you look for genitalia sticking out because this 7th abdominal segment here, I can get a little bit more light on that. May have to bump it up in the program, is right here. So, and it's just a relatively small segment too. So again, pretty easy to miss. Let's see if we can bring this in. And I might have to turn this sideways, but the cool and neat thing about this species, let's bring in more light, is it's got quite the, almost like a spine, little mountain-like peak inside there that makes right here, actually, let me boost it up. That becomes quite obvious. I'm going to change it to a side view so it's a little more defined. Yeah, these are, as a group, this is the kind of thing that you just have to collect a lot of bees before you run into these, or you're somehow lucky and working with a nesting aggregations of their hosts and you can spot them. It's a little bit blown out from the eye light intensity, but now you can pretty clearly see. It's a problem with dark things. So here's this mountain-ish, spine-ish, broadly based, if we turned it to the other direction, feature of T7 in Stelis louisae. Go back to the guide here for a sec. And there are other groups that match some of the kinds of things that we look at in other species. Flat across the end, sharply, and obviously pointed in the center of the rim. I wonder if I really just don't have very many males. Yeah, that's only Stelis australis, which I have a female of. And two slightly concave, and then trilobed. Which is the trilobed one? Narrow to, yeah, and I don't have that one either. But if you have those specimens, those become very helpful. Here we get into the differences among the species, which we're not going to spend any time on because everything is so rare. And I think we're dialing down to the end. Oh, so here, I guess we did keep these pit things. So recall when we were looking at the first specimen, Stelis louisae, that we had these square pits that were on a shelf in this particular case and ran completely across the segment. Here, I think what we're just looking at is the uh, the the pattern and completeness of those rectangular cells across that whole section. So here we run, let's just see what's going on here. So the problem with has is you often leave a click mark somewhere else. Fortunately, it's in blue. We have not. That will mess up your searches afterwards. So what is absent? So there are a few absent ones, and some are not. So here, interestingly, we have females and males, but not their opposite sexes sometimes. And complete. So this should be Stelis louisae, and oh, looks like several others can fall into that category. Interrupted, but this is the percentage. Oops. And okay, we're wrapping it up here because we're seeing you know, a lot of overlap between these categories. It may be something that we should just drop. I'll also point out that another difference between a lot of the black ones and the yellow ones is the presence, which I'm shifting now. Then we can take questions if there are any. And I'm going to bring back the light to something more reasonable at 100. And that on the thorax, the mesepisternum, which is the big plate below the front wing. Here's the tegula wing. With this tegula is the wing cover, scutum. This is the mesepisternum, sometimes called the pleura. Mitchell would call it the pleura. And as you see in a number of groups, particularly in the Anthidiinae, sometimes there's a sharp demarcation between the lateral facing surface of the propodium of the mesepisternum and the anterior or front facing surface. So in this case, you can make it out here, I think, a little bit. And what we're looking at is a sharp line. So you see that sharp line. This is basically where the legs, the front legs, tuck in. If it's a tuck in situation for this bee. And so some got a little fancy and made it a sharp line, a little raised line. This tucks in perhaps better because of that. And others have the old model, which is this entire area is not sharply defined, demarcated, no raised line, no two plate-like surfaces going on. And it's simply rounded over. Those would be, I think, all of the black ones. Again, the Stelis louisae, this is just a subspecies of it, has a number of cool characters that others do not and may engender it as a separate genus at some point. when the molecular people get hold of it. I think that's all I have. I will open it up. Claire, do we have any questions?
There's nothing in the chat, but I am gonna put this Stelis that David sent, and David can unmute and give us the story because it's blue.
Oh, yes, that's this cool Western one. What's the name of that?
Is he still on?
I don't know, but it just
He-
points
Okay,
out.
here I am.
Yeah,
Oh,
there
yeah,
you
yeah.
go. Okay, I didn't know if he was.
So-
yeah.
So this is a batch of specimens that came from Lauren Panicio at University of Oregon. This one has a Terry Griswold determination. It does not have a species name, and it's from Yosemite.
I think I can put a species name because I have a blue specimen, and I just don't think there's more than one of these around
Mhm.
that is in this collection. And what is it?
Sam,
This
is this from the
like
Smithsonian, or
yeah,
is
this
this
is
ours?
like a 100-year-old collection that
Mm-hmm.
someone had at their house. This is from Corvallis. Oh my gosh, look at
Oh,
that.
wow, interesting.
And Stelis, Montana. So people could do a quick look up and see if that's still the name. And the determiner was, I can't read it, but from 1932. And it was collected in 31, May 16th. Yeah,
Wow, that's
very
an
cool.
old
Not a super big bee, but certainly, it went metallic, which must be some pretty easy to do thing since a number of bees, there's not like, there's not a lot of kind of metallic. A lot of them just switch on the greens and the middle blues.
Yeah, the
But
other
yeah,
one,
that's a really
Sam,
nice one.
the other one I sent to Claire just a minute ago
Yeah.
is a hoplitis that is equally iridescent blue.
Yeah.
A bit of
Yeah.
a
Look at
surprise.
that! Look at that!
Is that fulgida? Or no, it says louisae. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have either of those metallic members out in the east, so you're lucky.
Mm-hmm.
It's so pretty. Yeah, does anyone have any other questions or things that you want to share on the screen for the good of the class?
Any mystery Stelis or stories? I do. Let's see, there was something I wanted to mention. I'll just mention that if anyone's interested, you could email myself or Claire, really. We're going to have a Bombus affinis gathering to share information about the species in Appalachia. So there's this isolated population, mostly in Virginia and West Virginia, but Mark Hepner refound it in Maryland this past year. And there's possibilities of also it being down North Carolina at minimum. And anyway, there's a lot going on. It's isolated, nothing in Ohio, Kentucky, other parts of Virginia and Maryland and to the Northeast. And then you have to go all the way over to the Four Corners area of the Midwest to get the main stem, which isn't saying much, of Bombus affinis. Why they both still exist in those areas and not others, very mysterious. Anyway, if you're interested, you can email us. It's basically an open discussion. We give people 10-minute slots. There's 3 hours now of 10-minute slots that people are sharing the information that they have or are planning to do for our friend Bombus affinis.
We did get a question in the chat. You mentioned osmia as one of the hosts. What are some other common hosts? I think you said the megacylids in general.
Yeah, so osmia, I think I want to say, but I'm not 100% sure, that the common pattern is the little dark ones are osmia, the medium-sized dark ones are hoplitis, and the colorful ones are megachile, but I'm not certain of that. And there could be other shenanigans with trichusa and things like that. But if anyone has any information, I'm sure it's out there. I'm not aware of it. This is just my impression.
Spencer says, I think Stelis, Corticus?
Quarticus?
There we go. Corticus. That's how you break that down phonetically. Stelis corticus has been found with varieties.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it is. Yeah, Quarticus is a pretty tiny one, and that makes sense.
Jeff asks, when is the Bombus affinis discussion? Is that the
Oh, sorry.
28th?
Friday starting at 10 Eastern.
Yes, this Friday, the 28th.
Yeah, we can just send you a
There.
Teams link and you can click and join.
Yeah, just email me or Sam.
All right, that was easy. I'll say the problem is if we invite Mike, then Mike and I share too many stories and get into all kinds of other details or arguments over species things. So I'm sorry that Mike's not here because I'm sure he has lots to add, but we actually are just finishing up the entire genus in one session, which is pretty amazing.
It's a small one though. And you don't have many samples, so
Right. Yeah. And then people don't run into them enough to really have to worry about a lot of, well, if you run into, Permaculatus, then you have to watch out for this. But I've seen many of these just one time and a few not at all.
Spencer, if you want to come off, you can share this with the group. But Spencer says, I think I saw on Discover Life that Stelis nita was going after Osmia bucephala. Any idea where that came from?
I'm not sure. I've collected one once and knitted up, or maybe I've seen two. It's the biggest of those black ones, so it would make sense that it would be chasing after the larger things. And Bucephala, as befitting the name, Bucephalus was Alexander the Great's giant horse, is big. So where that came from certainly wasn't from me. That perhaps someone has found it in a nest or something.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Well, no class next week. Well, Sam adventures. And so we'll be back, what's that, the second week in October? And I think we said we were going to come back with the Anthidiines.
Okay. Yeah. And do we have, and Mike's got good keys for those, so you can look those up and practice. And when's our next guest speaker? Do we have anything lined up?
We do. We have, maybe it's actually not until December. Jamie Strange is joining us December 7th.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was sooner too.
And also, if anyone has any suggestions or knows someone or wants to talk about a guide that they've developed or bring someone else in who's a specialist on identification, that would be awesome.
Yeah,
particularly as we go out to the West, so these Western things, and we can jump around because people are mostly looking these things up online, but it'd be nice to have some, start thinking about bringing in some more Westerner folks to discuss the nuances there. All right.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll see you all in a couple weeks.
Yep. Thank you, Claire.
Bye.